Pokemon is too easy. That's been something people have been saying now for over a decade, and I'm tired of doing nothing about it, which is why I've come to you. I have found a method to scientifically make Pokemon more difficult, but in doing so, I discovered that most of these games were never balanced to be difficult in the first place. And once you see it, well, you'll never be able to unsee it.
Look, kid, we already have this entire gym system. 8 type-themed challenges that's meant to weed the strongest out of the herd. We don't need to fix a thing, right?
See, you're half right. The gym system itself does work. However, the morons you've chosen to represent yourselves are consistently beaten by unfit teams with underbaked strategies. So I consulted math and Pokemon experts alike, learned data science and statistics, worked with some of the best game designers I know, and after several thousand calculations spanning over 3 years of my life, I have finally cracked the code on how to fix this. What I'm about to show you isn't just a rebalance of the existing gym structure. I want to show you exactly where your entire system breaks. So please, if you'd allow me, please let me rebalance the Pokemon gym system.
How?
Simple. I have constructed a bespoke gym system for each and every one of you, using the toughest types to deal with in your region specifically. Not every Pokedex is created equal, you know. Sinnoh has no fire types, Paldea has the most normal Pokemon per capita, and Kanto has a poison problem.
Hey!
Every type interacts with each other. It's why this exists. By figuring out how much of a type interacts with the rest of the population, not only for the regions in full, but even going as granular as to what is available at each individual point in your adventure, that'll lead us to the basis of our gyms. This single variable, availability, that is our guiding light, our golden rule that everything else stems from. This is what's responsible for nearly every complaint about difficulty that this series has garnered. If gyms are tests, then difficulty truly depends on what answers are available. A test in and of itself isn't easy or hard, it's dependent on what you can bring to the room. And from this point on, everything you see will follow from that. And I think the best way we could do this is to show the differences between how gyms are handled with limited versus too many options. So for this, let's take a look at Black and White versus Scarlet and Violet. In the first version of Unova, you are only able to catch 4 new species of Pokemon: rat, cat, puppy, monkey. This works for how the first gym is structured, with the triplets specifically being stronger against your starter, but that's offset by the aforementioned monkey who simply dog walks them. Contrast that with Paldea, where in theory you could get basically every Pokemon in the dex immediately. There's no reason you couldn't just catch a level 68 Garchomp with the sole intent to bulldoze a literal cricket. At that point, this isn't a test, it's a formality, and when a gym becomes that, the journey starts to lose a lot of its meaning. For both of these first gyms, the biggest hurdle that we need to account for is what you can find in a given time. With Unova, that's easy. 3 of the 4 new Pokemon you can get are weak to fighting, ergo a Timber and Mienfoo headline the first gym. It's a strong but manageable start to your adventure. For Paldea, that's a lot less straightforward. See, I'm not here to propose that we just bump up the levels, or give everyone EVs, or IVs, or competitive items, or abilities. If difficulty comes from raw numbers, it's temporary. If it comes from structure, that leaves an impression. That's why we remember stuff like Whitney's Miltank, or Sabrina's Alakazam. What I'm going for is akin to, here's a template of the original, all we have to do is turn the knob from this to that, and boom, that's our gym. It's like it was always meant to be there. And speak of the devil, out of the mathematically toughest types to trounce in Paldea, fire is our best option. Purely because the types that come later benefit from having higher power levels than what we can do for them here. Oricorio, Charcadet, and Terrafire Lilligant at least makes for an interesting start to the victory road. And therein lies the major differences between design philosophies. Unova restricts you to teach you the ropes, and Paldea gives you everything and subsequently teaches you nothing. Clearly, there's no one-size-fits-all solution to making a more challenging gym circuit. Each region has to have their individual needs met. Some need to account more for the fact that direct counter encounters aren't available yet. Hoenn has a critical lack of electric, rock, or ice coverage, so flying makes the most sense, as opposed to rock right now with the abundance of grass and water guys. Beautyfly, as supported by Doduo and Natu, trounce the grass and bug types that are around as well. Same goes for Ghost and Sinnoh. Instead of mollywhopping Rourke and his rock types, Drifloon's unique flying affinity boasts the same advantages, in addition to being immune to all the normal fighting moves that are thrown at it. And just to be mean, Miss Magius is someone you can technically get at this point in the game, provided somebody has a Reaper Cloth. All you have to do is make the main attack Nightshade for balance, and then everything is Kino. Rock and Kalos is less of a concern as Tyrant and Carbink shut down those pesky water and grass types, and there being an absence of poison, steel, and ground types that would otherwise pose a big problem. Those are just a small fry though, let's be a little bit more aggressive, yeah? Black and White 2 doubled the deck size of their predecessors and has vastly different route progression, so we're treating them separately. And because of that, it finally gives me an opportunity to put the most evil type in for the first gym. Dragon Gym 1! Yes, I know that it's insane given precedence, but that's the entire point.
Oh, come on! That's wildly unfair!
There's no reason we can't consider this sort of stuff, and your reaction has been accounted for in the data already. There's more than enough options in this area that Dragon doesn't really have superiority of. Think about it like this. Your starters are more important the more limited your options are, and if the first gym has something that directly resists that, then you have to play smart. Normal already did that pretty well, and this is just that, but taking it up a notch. Axew and Dino, plain and simple. This is mirrored when after you defeat the Totem Minior and its lackey Crabrawler in Alola, you fight your first Kahuna also sporting a brigade of dastardly dragons in Jangmo-o, Noibat, and Drampa. You can get at least one Pokemon of every type in Galar before fighting the first gym due to the wild area, so our line of thinking has to shift away from the thought of availability and more towards optimization. Electric works best for this. Considering it's the highest leveled first gym in this series, I definitely feel more comfortable putting Arctozolt as the ace with a Morpeko preceding it. Having it be grass in the first place was definitely a mistake, especially keeping in mind with how few interesting grass types they introduced in this game. Here's a case. Let's look at the Golden Children, Kanto and Johto. As Johto's population is basically just Kanto expanded, they share 99% of the same statistical ratios. Johto's goal was to improve upon the original decks, but all it did was ultimately add on to a very skewed set of numbers, to the point where there weren't even enough new Pokemon to have any differences in their gym spreads, which is why it's important to emphasize when you can find each Pokemon. As we are using the most expanded version of each Pokedex, in this case these, both first gyms are actually quite shocking. For Kanto, it's Steel, which is literally impossible. The only way this can work is if we had like an exchange from another region using Steel-type variants of Kanto Pokemon. My preference is Alola, with this gym leader bringing in a Magnemite and an Alolan Diglett. Alolan Sandshrew would have also been a great pick. However, with both Charmander and Mankey getting 4 times effective attacks on it, I really don't believe that this would have been the best fit. Diglett is at least immune to Pikachu's electric attacks, and the most baffling thing to me is that the best first gym in Johto is actually Rock! Seriously, look at every Pokemon you can get between when you start the game and what becomes accessible after you get your first badge. It's insane what Rock can do here. And we even have the best Pokemon for this gym in Shuckle and Sudowoodo, both of which weren't available in the first games. This is how Johto gyms should be. It didn't fail because it's old, it failed because the developers didn't have the foresight to capitalize on the best candidates for the job. You know what? Fuck it. I'm gonna tear these two a new one because every single flaw that we've danced around thus far originates here. There are so many problems that you two specifically have that do not show up anywhere else, even with the constant rebalancing from the official powers that be. Johto Gym 2, flying. There are so many interesting flying types in this region. Here are just a few that I'm pulling out of my ass. Delibird, Togetic, Murkrow. Wow! That's 3 Pokemon with wildly different game plans, which is 3 more than Faulkner could ever think up with his Pidgey and Pidgeotto. Steel's up for Gym 4. Using the same team count that's already in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, we could feasibly have a team of 4, comprising Skarmory, Magneton, Scizor, and Steelix. That's something we can do. These are all Pokemon you can get between levels 21 to 25. If you don't like it, Get rid of one! I don't care! Fun fact, there's actually a good chunk of mons who are quad weak to grass and water in Kanto, and considering there are no cuts between generations, all of these problems still exist in Johto and then some. Both water and grass are gyms solely because of this. And even funnier, the most powerful grass type introduced in Johto is fucking Blossom! Fine, Jump Bluff, Sunflora, Victory Bell, go. Remember, every gym leader's ace should be a new Pokemon from these games, so that limits us substantially, especially later on. Psychic is here at Gym 6, and at least it makes sense. Girafarig, Slowking, Alakazam, Espeon. The cat is in fact more powerful than whatever the hell Alakazam is. Electric makes an appearance at Gym 7 with its team of Lantern, Electabuzz, Electrode, and Ampharos. And as alluded to earlier, Water rounds us out in Gym 8 with Octillery, Poliwrath, Azumarill, Mantine, and Kingdra. And all of these types are in Kanto's gym lineup as well.
Wait, that's only 7. There should be 8 of them.
In a minute! Kanto Gym 2, Rock. This is a really hard type to work with here, because the only one that actually matters is Aerodactyl. Make it a fossil-themed gym and give him Kabuto. Why not? Grass remains at Gym 4, but because of the fact that Kanto's general power level is stronger than Johto's, to the point where this Gym 4 is higher than their Gym 5, we can afford to do a little bit of tomfoolery, you see? Victory Bell, Vileplume, Executor. If you're feeling saucy, substitute one of the V's with a Hisuian Electrode. I won't judge. Water can actually have an interesting Gym 5 with Cloyster, Tentacruel, Slowbro, and Lapras, and Electric can have a decent Gym 6 with its band of Electabuzz, Electrode, Raichu, and Jolteon, although there's a little bit more flavor that you can do with this one, like guaranteeing Raichu has Surf, or Electrode being replaced by an Alolan Golem. Otherwise, you just have a team of all monotyped electric mons, which kinda contributes to my point of having a dogshit dex design. I digress though, because Psychic benefits from the power bump with Hypno, Starmie, Mr. Mime, and Alakazam, and Flying actually rounds us out with Dodrio, Golbat, Scyther, Gyarados, and a legal Dragonite.
Just cut the bullshit, dude. We get it. We aren't perfect, but neither are you. Or your dumb little math. Our regions were the first. There was no expectation for us to follow.
But apparently everyone needs to follow your example, Golden Boy. This way, with this new system, it at least evens out the playing field. And yeah, math can't a good game make, but that's because we are all tethered to what you provided for us to begin with. Case in point, Gym 3. Both games empirically say Ghost. For this, all we have to go off of is the Gengar line and Misdreavus. For Johto, that's not an issue. Levels are lower, so Ghastly Misdreavus is a viable option. I still don't like it, and if I had my way, I'd substitute one of the two Ghastly for a Galarian Corsola, but that's neither here nor there. It's Kanto where I hold the issue. There, we only have the Gengar line, a dual poison type. Conveniently of which is not only the most abundant type in those games, but was also mathematically the 9th best. True neutral, if you will. Therefore, I had an epiphany, where instead of having Ghost, we utilized Poison with the caveat of at least one of the Ghosts being on the team. This was a strong case for me to break the sanctity of the calculations, not because the math failed, because the game never gave Ghost a fighting chance to begin with. However, I know that would be kind of a tough sell. So I consulted the statistics and developers I worked with, and after a little bit, all of them were in agreement with this proposal. So for this replacement, we'll substitute what would have been Ghastly Haunter Gengar with the Coughing Haunter Nidoking. On paper, this is stronger, right? It's at least more honest to the system we're working with, because pretending Ghost works here would just be a blatant lie.
That calls into question the validity of your process. If you're just free to change these things all willy-nilly, doesn't that mean that nothing in this is sacred?
Yes, what's the deal with this illustrious math anyways? Are you ever going to elaborate on that?
If you want to use this as a way to invalidate this, sure, fine, I can't stop you. However, every single thing I've done has been peer-reviewed and is devoid of my own personal bias. Otherwise, Grass and Rock would be nowhere near these lists. But one thing's for sure, the math doesn't lie.
I mean, are we actually going to see it? Are you going to explain it all?
When the time comes, I will. In the meantime, I suggest you don't goad me on this. You won't like what you see behind the curtain, because once you see what I've dealt with, you'll understand why I'm like this today. This philosophy is also present in both Unova games, with there being an original dex and the sequels expanding it. And even though it's the same region with most of the same places and most of the same gym types, the progression there is different enough to have radically different challenges to face. To show a great example of this, there's actually a stretch where the progression between gyms are identical. Same roads, same cities, completely different pressure. When you arrive at Castelia City, in the first games you're greeted by a hot fire gym repped with a team of Larvesta, Simisear, and Heatmore. Whereas 2 years later, it's converted into a chill water gym, with a cast consisting of Ducklet, Basculin, Palpitoad, and Simipour. Pressing past the desert, you make it to Nimbasa City, where you're either greeted by a dastardly dragon gym with Axew, Dino, and Druddigan, or a far tougher flying gym with Arkin, Mantine, Unpheasant, and Sigilith. Defeating those takes you to Drift Vale City, where it's actually an inversion on the third gym, with water replacing everyone but Ducklet, and fire ousting Heatmore as the ace in favor of some heavier hitters. I mean, think about it. What if these were the same trainers at different points in their lives? They did this in the vanilla games, and it would add so much flavor. And after you make your way to Mistralton, you fight either a steel specialist with Durant, Poniard, Escavalier, and Excadrill, or the Dark Diva with an Umbreon, Zoroark, Drapion, and Crocodile. But to get there, you need to fight the second gym. In the original, you'd fight a flying-type fiend with an Emolga and a Swoobat. And in the sequels, it's a ghoulish ghost-type guru with Shuppet, Frillish, and Golett. It's a snapback to reality. That same dark specialist from before, 2 years removed, stands in the way with their Zoroark, Scrafty, Liepard, and Crocodile, or a new electric leader fitted with Ampharos, Magnezone, Galvantula, and Electros. In your final trial are familiar faces with a more confident Ghost Leader before they change their ways, with Cofagrigus, both Jellicent, Golurk, and Chandelure, or the Steel Leader who have realized their potential and became the strongest, sporting Ferrothorn, Bisharp, Steelix, Durant, and Excadrill. If I were to suggest a single significant structural change, the way I handled the sequel games is that their challenge mode settings were their default, and for that to carry over into their predecessors. I firmly believe that Unova, while having a set of incredibly interesting Pokemon, also has some of, if not the worst evolution criteria in the series. And I don't feel like it would be the best idea to introduce the regional variants, even though things like Galarian Stunfisk would fit right in with Gym 6 Steel, or Hisuian Zorua for Gym 8 Ghost. The entire ethos of at least the original games were to have strictly the new Pokemon only able to be encountered. And undoing that for the sequels gave us more freedom to nix doofuses like these and add actually more competent mons like these, which is another point in their favor. Challenge mode bumps up the levels anywhere from 1 to 3 levels, which in a lot of cases could be the difference between baby mode and burly evolution. That wasn't accounted for in these lineups, so I encourage you to use your imaginations on what that could bring, or how that could change the gym order in its entirety. Maybe Swanna could be used instead of Ducklet, Clang instead of Durant, who knows? The math sets the ceiling for what we can do, and it's up to us to see how hard we can press our faces against it before it shatters.
So what I'm hearing is that the math isn't perfect. I mean, these teams may leave a bit to be desired.
No, the math and the calculations themselves are fine. What may be limiting us is the interpretation of said math. And for the record, I never claimed this to be perfect. My goal was to just make it better. I wanted to add more Pokemon to each team to align with other generations, which made things for Unova 1 a lot harder than anticipated. Looking at stuff like Gyms 2 and 7, they're situated in a position where they can make genuinely the most out of their type, whereas everyone else can have an argument made for them about a potential power discrepancy. However, on the flip side, there's also an argument to be made that move selection may rectify that, like how Axew can use Dragon Dance or be taught Dragon Claw via TM. The job of a good data visualist is to take the raw data and interpret it in the most logical way that makes the most sense to the most people while not skewing anything any which way. And I think the crux of that limitation can be found in Sinnoh. Sinnoh isn't as broken as these two over there, but up to this point we've been kind of brute forcing things with this process, aggressively slotting down these new pieces into an already half-finished puzzle, expecting them to fit. Now it's time to get surgical. This is more of a flavor thing, I must say, but considering that a good quarter of the dex is relegated to improving older Pokemon with new evolutions, like Yanmega, Magmortar, and Dusknoir, I say let's lean into that, and wherever possible, have those be the aces of those gyms. We already have Miss Magius for Ghost, so moving right along to Gym 2, Flying is our best bet with Chatot, Vespiquen, and Gliscor. This comes right after the big forest area after all. Gym 3 lands us in fairy territory, with the leader taunting us with Mr. Mime, Clefable, and Togekiss. The next one continues to streak with a grass gym with Carnivine, Roserade, and a particularly tanky Tangrowth blocking the way past. Ironically, after Tangrowth lets you through, we're met with another issue, water. The new evolutions are Sinnoh's big claim to fame, but they flat out do not have a water type one. And the only thing that comes remotely close to that is Mantike. I could throw that thing like a frisbee. And to add insult to injury, the strongest new water type that's gym friendly is Floatzel, which is fine, I guess, but considering how there are several stronger water types, it's definitely a slap in the face. For now, let's just add in the Beaver and the Slug and we're good to go. We're not adding cheater Pokemon here, we're better than that. Surely we won't have to deal with that again. Ah, god damn it. Nah, we're just gonna circle back. Gym 6 is electric with a toned-down version of Volkner's Platinum team replacing the Gen 1ers with a fancy new washing machine, and Gym 8 is now being manned by a Dark-type trainer with Spiritomb, Honchkrow, Drapion, Houndoom, and Ace Weavile. Honestly, looking back at it, I'm happy with our little experiment with Sinnoh. 6 of 8 gyms abide by the theme, and it's at least more generally cohesive than the originals, while still being more difficult. The only ones that buck this are the aforementioned Water Gym and Gym 7 Steel. And yeah, Probopass exists, Magnezone too for that matter, but if these late game aces fold to a single Earthquake, we'd end right back up where we started. It definitely helps that Lucario was Pokemon's main mascot for the Sinnoh games at large, and now it's both a fighting and steel type ace, accompanied by Steelix, Bronzong, and lead Bastiodon. Which I know contradicts what I said earlier about weaknesses, but at the very least, this has crazy high defenses, and it has sturdy, so it's guaranteed to move at least twice, and honestly, it has a solid amount of coverage moves compared to the other two.
See? Look, right there. You just decided to sidestep Magnezone, a mathematically more powerful Pokemon, in favor of the weaker Lucario. And to rub salt in the wound, you added Bastiodon, the guy where you could actually just punch him in the head and he'll just go down. I mean, look at that.
I'm just gonna ignore that. But is it just me? Or is there some overlap in these? I could have sworn I heard Ghost a good few times now.
I was also thinking the same thing, but with individual Pokemon as well. And for the record, I could have done that with my pinky.
That's not your imagination. To put it plainly, some types are just better than others, and some regions just don't have the tools to really silence some of the heavier hitters. Ghost is in a really unique position where it has 2 immunities from the get-go. No other type has that. So the more normal and fighting types there are, the math automatically compensates for Ghost and just makes them better because of that immunity.
So, if I'm understanding correctly, the more volatile a Pokedex is, the more interesting the gym circuit will be?
Well, I don't understand where you'd get that, but...
Yeah, that makes sense. The closer you are towards an even distribution, the more homogenized the circuit will be. I think I'm starting to get it.
Yeah, but...
Wait, but would that make it a good Pokedex? Wouldn't we want less of those crazy strong types in the region?
See, you'd think that, but that's what led to Kanto and Johto's problems.
Fuck you, we're great! Right, but could there be a happy medium? Maybe instead of having like 20 to 30 ghost types, we could have like half that? I mean, what if that's what the new guy's gonna do?
We aren't here to make a perfectly balanced region. That's boring! We're here to take what we currently have and make something better than what we got. But fine, if you want to be humored, we already took a look at the biggest train wreck of a dex.
Hey! Ooh.
So we'll look at what is considered the closest to perfect that we already have. And to no one's surprise, it's you two.
Really?
If we want to get technical about it, Galar has a more mathematically even dex, but that's by a measly 0.02%, so let's just look at both of them in tandem. And to help things there's no longer a fight between the math and the game, I'd say now they're working together. Now obviously it's not actually perfect, otherwise there would be an even 22 Pokemon per type in this game, but it's as close as we're gonna get in the moment. And I'm glad we're talking about this right after Sinnoh because there's actually some similarities with what fits best for each team. You'll see what I mean. To start with Paldea, funnily enough, 4 of the 5 Team Star admins actually have a place here. Makes sense, as they were actually a few of the most difficult fights in Scarlet and Violet. Gym 2 is Poison with Skrelp, Shroodle, and Terra Poison Bramblegast. Grass and Ghost counter Poison's weaknesses in Psychic and Ground, but I'm not 1000% happy with it. Weavile is also a viable option here, and in fact, it was the ace in the first draft of this, but when will you ever see Bramblegast? Gym 3 is Dark with Stunky, Low-Kicks, Bombardier, and Terra Dark Hawlucha as the ace. And skipping all the way to Gym 7, we have our final Team Star admin with Fairy. Darkspun, Tinkaton, Hatterene, and Terra Fairy Gallade is what we're after. It's funny to think that the strongest of the Team Star guys were working with the weakest type statistically. I wonder if that's why they had to overlevel so much.
Hold it. Hawlucha, Gallade, Bramblegast. These are really odd Pokemon to have as the Terra types. Why those specifically?
Brassius' Sudowoodo and Iono's Mismagius were incredible fits for their types. Sudowoodo's rock moves perfectly countered a majority of Grass's weaknesses, and Mismagius' Levitate ability combined with its Terra type made for a Pokemon with 0 weaknesses. That is what I want to emulate here.
Right, but we did that with all of those types.
No, you didn't. Larry Staraptor, Grush's Altaria, Tulip's Florges, all of the Elite Four, you, all of whom range from a spectrum of this did nothing to actively detrimental. With this new system, we're going to at least stick with it. I'd hold on to that, big guy. You're not out of the weeds either. And that's not to say that these are necessarily the only good choice for each. For instance, Gym 4, Electric returns with Pincurchin, Luxray, and Kilowattrol, and instead of Terra Electric Mismagius, summon Gyarados. It may not have Levitate, but unlike the former, there are at least moves that Gyarados can use that actively screws over the ground types you're likely going to bring in. You might be noticing a trend at this point where the Terra Ace patches their own worst matchup. That's intentional. For instance, the Flying type leader has a Terra Toadschool with Talonflame, Driftblim, and Flamigo. Gym 8 follows in stride as a Steel user with Terra Noivern leading the squad of Revavroom, Fortress, Magnezone, and King Gambit. The only gym that doesn't follow this trend up to this point is Gym 6 Ghost with Frostlass, Annihilate, Golden Go, and Terra Ghost Heracross. Grimmsnarl would have been an excellent choice, however, I didn't really feel right doing so because of Galar. Sword and Shield generally fares a bit better, partially because of its selection of Pokemon. However, it's hampered by a certain cutoff point that limits us to which specific Pokemon we can use even further. Starting at Gym 3, every single gym leader has a Gigantamax Pokemon, a luxury afforded to only around 25 available mons in the main game. Ergo, in addition to having to figure out which type works best where, we have to consider which G-Max form works best, which actually did sway where some gyms went. Like Grimmsnarl, which landed it square in Gym 6, the earliest point where you can get it. It's supported by Skuntank, Pangoro, and Obstagoon. We already discussed Electric and their Dynamax Arctozolt, but the other regular Dynamax we see in this game is Alchemy in the Fairy Gym, accompanied by Whimsicott and Slurpuff. Now, I know that sounds powerful, but I'd like to remind you that we're in our mid-20s in terms of levels. That's perfectly reasonable to have an evolved Pokemon by that point. All of these upcoming types will look familiar as we just discussed their counterparts in prior regions, so we'll just prattle them off at the same cadence as you would fight them in the actual games. Water, Araquanid, Barrascuda, G-Max Lapras. Flying, Noctowl, Hawlucha, Cramorant, G-Max Corviknight. Steel, Berserker, Galarian Stunfisk, Copperajah, G-Max Duraludon. We already touched on Dark, so up next is Ghost with Cursula, Aegislash, Runerigus, and G-Max Gengar. That just leaves Fire with Torkoal, Turtonator, Salazzle, Colossal, and G-Max Scentiscorch. I kid you not, the Bug is more powerful as a G-Max than the big hunk of rock. I'm shocked as well.
So we share a lot of types, and the closer we get to a uniformly balanced game, the more overlap we'll see.
See, now you're getting it.
That's a very narrow way to think about it, but yes. The main differences would be the actual Pokemon themselves and how they'd synergize together. This also isn't anything new, by the way. For the past 3 generations that we've had gyms, we've had consistent grass, fairy, and technically ice gyms. Scooting even earlier, fighting had a gym in Gens 2 through 4, all around the same area as well. Rock and water are pretty omnipresent, as is electric, only not having a gym in Johto and Galar. The only types that aren't consistent in getting gyms at all are ground and poison, and that's because ground is unfortunately outclassed by the amount of flying types. If you can't even hit them, then what gives?
But ground-type Pokemon don't just learn ground-type moves. Coverage against their weaknesses is a big part of why trainers typically do better against our gyms.
You are absolutely right, but then why couldn't it be a two-way street?
But then it'd be unfair.
The only thing unfair is coddling your challengers. Adversity breeds innovation. Wouldn't you want to consistently be challenged by the best trainers in the world? Didn't you say that the entire point of this system was to weed out the strongest? The best?
Then how does this prove anything? You come in here spouting some horse shit, saying, oh, I'm quit, I can fix it, oh, look at fucking purple hair or whatever, and then proceed to tell us the same things over and over and over. Fire gym here, electric there, ghosts everywhere.
Because that's what the data says. You don't think I want to have more interesting gyms?
That's enough, Blue.
There's more than difficult leaders in our circuits. What's to say that any of this will actually change anything?
Blue, you need to chill out.
Hey, I'm not the one that's just parroting the same shit, okay? Why aren't the cool types here? Where's fighting? Where's bug? Where's psychic?
Because those types are just worse than the others.
Then prove it!
Fine. Fine. You want to see behind the curtain? All right. Just note that this is your decision. Here is the stuff I've dedicated my life to for over 1,000 days. It all starts with gathering the data. Let's use Alola as our main example to help contextualize things. First things first, we have to figure out which version of the region we'll be using. The obvious choices are stuff like third versions of games like Emerald or Platinum or so on. The more Pokemon available in the dex, the better our results will be. Alola, in this case, will be using their Ultra counterparts as it expands the dex from 301 to 403. The only time where we didn't do this was for Unova, but that was explained earlier, and I want to make clear that we didn't dive into any DLC expansions. However, there aren't only 403 types in this dex. Pokemon like Beware, Sandslash, and Golisopod are dual-typed. So in order to find out how many types there were in a region, we just counted. And for instances like dual-type Pokemon, they were given 1 point towards each of their types, so Beware counted for both normal and fighting. So all in all, we wouldn't be looking at 403 Pokemon, we'd be looking at 626 instances of types. Remember how I said this took over 1,000 days? This is the type of shit I had to deal with just to get started. But to get a good read on how much of the population each type makes up, we then convert the raw numbers into percentages. That's our raw data. We also catalog the percentages of how many dual types there are in a region. For instance, the only 2 Ice and Steel Pokemon are the Alolan Sandslash line. That comes to play in a moment. We also had to catalog all 170 unique dual typings, eliminating any duplicates like Water Bug versus Bug and Water, because functionally, they all just work the same. Now comes time for the big stuff. The processing. We have to see how much of a type interacts with each other. Remember that type chart mentioned way earlier? Amplify that on a scale to fit an entire game. I mean, how much does Fairy actually interact with the rest of the region? We all know it's weak to Steel and Poison, but how many Steel types are even in Alola? What about Poison? We had to calculate the percentages of all of that. Same with resistances and super effectiveness, and every single other quantifiable metric, including how it does against dual types. That's why Grass did so well in Kanto. There are so many Rock and Ground and Rock and Water types, both of whom are quad weak to Grass. Immunities also played a big factor. Keep in mind, the gyms have to use that type, so if it's utterly walled by another, then it's probably not a good fit. That's why you see Ghost, Steel, Fairy, Flying, etc. on here, because they're not only immune to a type or two, but those types are so populous in the games they're in that it genuinely makes a huge impact. There are so many different ways a single type interacts with another, and all of them were accounted for. We go any deeper, then we're dealing with individual Pokemon and their general stat spread, which would have added another 1,000 days to this process. But in lieu of that, we found a workaround. So for those keeping count, it's 18 types times 10 regions times 10 categories that we have to keep track of, plus the 170 dual type options per region, so times that by 10 again, and we get 3,500 calculations just on the processing front. And we're still not done with that yet. See, not every category should be weighted equally. As we have it now, even the negative stats are still treated as a good thing. This is why I brought in the math and statistics experts on this, because if it were solely up to me, I would have weighted things way differently. The main idea for this was that defensive stats were weighted higher than offensive stats because of that aforementioned coverage thing. You can't really change the defensive aspects of a type, whereas you can generally learn moves to get around your offensive shortcomings, leading us to these weights. They're generally a mirror of one another, with the defensive stats being twice as important aside from neutral. With those weights and these statistics, combining them into our formula is as easy as just multiplying each percentage by each weight and adding the rest together. It's a long string of addition and multiplication for our final equation. But that's not the end of it. You could say, congrats, we have our list, but that's only talking about the availability of everything in a macro sense. We need to dive deeper. For this, we consulted your grandfather.
What?
When it comes to finding interesting ways to beat Pokemon games, you're probably familiar with the Nuzlocke, or using a single Pokemon, or any number of challenge run. One such run is the Professor Oak Challenge, where you have to get every possible Pokemon you can find before challenging every gym. This works out perfectly for us because there's so much documentation when it comes to these challenges, and it cleanly outlines exactly which Pokemon you can find when. This leads us to figuring out the exact order. We have the 8 toughest types, but now it's time to figure out where they all go. So what had to happen was that I went through every single one of these sections and find the vulnerabilities, and then through trial and error, assign each type and team to each slot. Notice how I've been maintaining the general level structure of each region, or not using any starter Pokemon, or involving any DLCs even though it would expand the decks and give me more to work with. The only thing I've ever messed with is the amount of Pokemon there were in a given fight, but only if it's necessary. For instance, in Paldea, Gym 3 has a team of 4, but then the very next gym only has 3? Let's make it 4. Chuck and Johto, despite being the 5th gym leader, only has 2 Pokemon when the one prior had 4. Having a general range to follow wildly swings in overall composition when it comes to the team building stage. This is why Unova 1 was so difficult to plan. The most a gym leader had at any point was 3. That's unacceptable. If I wanted this to just be a math thing, I'd completely omit this. I could just say, oh yeah, the 8 toughest types in this region are A, B, C, D, etc. But that's not as interesting, is it? For those who want to be pedantic, which sure fine, that makes sense considering the topic of all this is every single rule I followed when making these changes. Every gimmick is kept intact, every progression kept in check. This is as sound as I could humanly make it. Like stated earlier, all we're doing is taking the old leaders out and replacing them with better ones. I am not pulling this out of my ass. This was meticulously researched, cross-referenced, and peer-reviewed until it was as good as I could get it. This looks simple, but that's after 5 other rounds of tests to make sure the formulas actually worked. We found every angle, scrapped duds and red herrings, reassessed how we wanted to approach this, and after all of this, this is what I have to show for it.
Then why do this? What's your end game?
Well, it's for them. For the future of this franchise. Wind, waves, and beyond. They can use this knowledge if they want to make a perfect Pokedex, evenly distribute the available Pokemon, or even skew the exact opposite direction and make something akin to that bozo. They can do that. These metrics can be used to calculate their perfect gym circuit as well. If they choose to go down that route, that's excellent. If not, so be it. But at least they will know. You got anything else to say, asshole? That's what I fucking thought. So, back on track. All that's left is the Mega Evolution games, right? Let's round things out.
Wait, I thought we were talking about Alola. How does that tie into this?
Right, yes, Alola. You're an odd case, but I think we may do. Alola has 2 things. In Trials, harder wild Pokemon commonly with both buffs and bodyguards, and Kahunas, which are akin to more traditional gym battles. We opted to do both in this case, which means we had to look at the 12 toughest types instead of the usual 8. Let's go island by island. We already touched on the first ones, so we sail away to Akala for 3 back-to-back trials. Starting with a Totem Delmise armed with a Morolol and Ammonite for a grass trial, then moving to Totem Vikavolt with Masquerain and Sandile on deck, and ending with a speedy Totem Passimian alongside its counterpart Oranguru and Trevenant. The 3 trials of Grass, Electric, and Fighting prep you for your Kahuna fight with Kahili and her flying types. She has a Pom-Pom Oricorio, Crobat, and Ace Toucanon. Ula Ula Island only has 2 trials this time around, but the power levels certainly start to spike. Totem Muck has a chokehold combined with its familiar crew of Moxie Honchkrow and Levitate Mismagius. Alolan Muck has a signature ability called Power of Alchemy, where after you KO a partner Pokemon, Muck gains that ability, meaning if you play your cards wrong, you'll be in for a world of hurt. Afterwards, you have to deal with a Totem Stamina Mudsdale, fighting alongside Alolan Dugtrio and Torkoal, where their entire strategy is to drain you of your speed and set up the sun to deplete you of your powerful grass and water attacks. Cap things off with a Fairy Kahuna and their team of Rabombi, Ninetales, and Mimikyu. And Pony Island mirrors to Prior with 2 trials and a final Kahuna fight. Totem Sandslash is up to bat with its team of Metagross and Drizzle Pelipper. You're not getting off any solid fire moves anytime soon. An alternative option would also be Togedemaru, but we rarely see Sandslash, so I thought we could throw it a bone. Combine that with Totem Palossand and its band of misfits, including Frostlass and Porygon Z, it covers a lot of bases. And unsurprisingly, that means that Alola's most resilient Kahuna is Water with Bruxish, Toxapex, Gastrodon, and Wishy-Washy. Let's finish things off with the regions that cover Mega Evolution. To address the elephant in the room, none of the gym leaders in any of these 2 games utilize Mega Evolution. I strongly believe that if you can use a mechanic, the bosses should be able to as well. Otherwise, that gives you a huge advantage over them, which definitely contributes to these games being a lot easier than most. We're gonna give the gym leaders Megas right when you get access to yours. Remember when we were talking about Gigantamax and Sword and Shield, where only certain Pokemon got access to that hyper-specific mechanic that we had to plan everything around? Well, we have to do that here as well.
Wait, after over 10 years, there have been new Mega Evolutions discovered, most of which are for Pokémon you could find in the original games. Do you use the new ones where applicable, or do we only work with the ones that were intended to be in the region to begin with?
Same with the ones discovered shortly following X and Y and My remake. There are mons like Sableye, Sharpedo, and Steelix that get Mega Evolutions in Auras, but they're available in the Kalos decks.
Ah, very astute. I think for the sake of simplicity, we'll be looking at these games as they are. Kalos gets the X and Y decks, while Hoenn getting the Auras decks. And if any Megas seem to fit the bill, we'll briefly mention them, but they weren't made with the initial team composition we came up with in mind. But before we get to the gyms that Mega Evolve, we need to work up to that. You get your Mega Bracelet in Hoenn shortly after the 5th gym, so we'll save the toughest Mega Evolutions in that group for then. But by crushing the flying gyms in Gym 1, you advance towards a Ghost Gym with Duskull, Shuppet, and Sableye. From there, we hit a rare 4 Pokemon gym in Water with Spheal, Starmie, Gorobus, and Milotic. Watson had 4 guys in Emerald for some reason. Then comes Grass with Vileplume, Tropius, Breloom, and Ludicolo, and then you circle back to Petalburg with a Skarmory, Aron, Magneton, and Metang. It could have been a Laren, but the highest Pokemon there is level 31, and Aron evolves at 32. We're saving Mawile for later, and unfortunately, there's just not that many Steel types in Hoenn. However, we can't dwell on that as we cross the pond to Kalos, who has a lot less buildup in their gimmick's grand entrance. Steel's up second with Honedge, Ferroseed, and Klefki, arguably the strongest new Steel type at the time, and then comes Ghost with Haunter, Rotom, and Gourgeist. Kalos' Gym 4 is electric with Raichu, Heliolisk, and Mega Ampharos. With the advent of the Mega Raichus, I could totally see a world where each version uses one of the 2, but I still think the Dual Dragon Ampharos completely clears. Afterwards is Dark with Absol, Pangoro, Malamar, and Mega Houndoom, with Malamar choosing to take center stage if you think that's better. Flying's up next with Staraptor, Yanmega, Talonflame, and Mega Aerodactyl, with Mega Staraptor or Hawlucha being very solid candidates for alternatives. The tastiest team comes next with Crawdaunt, Quagsire, Clawitzer, or Mega Gyarados comprising water. I don't really know how Starmie tastes or if Sharpedo Fin Soup would be ethical to eat, but those could also be suitable replacements. Speaking on Sharpedo, shifting back to Hoenn, Gym 6, the first gym with Mega Evolution, is Dragon. At this power level, we're able to bring in middle evolutions like Shelgon and Vibrava, but also Kingdra and Mega Altaria. Alternatively, we could at this point break the glass in case of emergency with Mega Sceptile, because Mega Altaria would make more sense later. Crawdaunt also brings to mind Gym 7, which it also appears in, alongside Mightyena, Sharpedo, and Mega Absol. And the creme de la creme of both Kalos and Hoenn is the Fairy type. This was the most recent type added to the series, No You Don't Count, and in X and Y are made up of Mr. Mime, Granbull, Sylveon, Florges, and Mega Mawile. I'd say Audino could be a replacement, but we both know that would be a lie, and Clefable doesn't even exist in X and Y. And for Hoenn, because of the lack of variety, we roll with that Mawile as our lead with a Azumarill, 2 Wigglytuffs, and a Mega Gardevoir to finish things off. Or we can put Mega Altaria here and put Gardevoir in the place of one of the Wigglytuffs so there are no duplicates. It's really up to you. There. That's 84 gyms spanning 30 years worth of games across 10 regions, taking 3 years of my life to put together.
So what about the Elite Four?
What's it?
The Elite Four. You know, the actual toughest trainers you fight in the region.
You see, I don't care about them.
Oh, you motherfucker!